go.
That's the general evaluator.
Okay. Let me forget.
Tonight, we have a speaker who, when he walks up here, we never know whether he's going to give a humorous speech or a serious speech. But we do know that he will give it with lots of zeal. Sometimes the most obvious things turn out not to be so obvious. That's the case with the subject of Lloyd's speech this evening. For Project 7, researcher topic from the Competent Communication Manual, Lloyd Smith, what is the world made of?
On the one hand, it seems pretty obvious what the world's made out of. Stuff. It's all around us. We don't even think about things like that. But in reality, we should. And we're in for a surprise when we do. If I asked you, what is the substance, the single substance that people around the world use most often, you would probably, sooner or later, guess the correct answer. Anybody have a thought about that? The material or substance or whatever that people all over the world use the most often? Water. And that's correct. Think about it. Think about how much you use every single day, and then think about all the people on the face of the earth. However, if I asked you what the second most commonly used substance is, I would wager a large amount of money that no one in here will come up with the answer.
Silicon.
Silicon.
Well,
We're
you're wrong
thinking the
about
same.
that.
We're wrong, but at least we
Yeah. Actually, the answer is cement. Was anyone thinking that? That's the cement. That's the second most frequently used substance all over the earth. It's all around us. We don't even notice it. There's so much of it. For example, the walls of this room are made out of cement. Now, here's something that's a little bit technical, but it's actually kind of important. We tend to use the words cement and concrete interchangeably. But in reality, that's not the case. That stuff that the walls are made out of is concrete. Concrete is a very simple thing. It's little bitty grains of stuff like sand or volcanic rock or something like that, slightly larger pebbles and so on, and then water, and then cement. And the purpose of the cement is actually to hold all the other stuff together. When concrete is made, it's a very complex recipe to get it to work out right. But when it's made, it's of course quite wet, as most of you have seen it pumped out of trucks and whatnot, that sort of thing. And when it's poured into forms, it begins to harden. And what happens is that the cement holds all of those little rocks and particles and whatnot together in a very tight matrix, or format. Matrix, I guess, is the right word. And it can't come apart. And that's how come concrete walls stand up. Now, as you can imagine, in ancient times, they didn't have concrete. I'm talking about really ancient times, like thousands of years ago. And so when structures were built, they were built out of natural materials like stone and timber and that sort of thing. The problem with those structures is they can't be very big because they'll fall down due to their own weight. Even stone, believe it or not, if you pile it up high enough, it will collapse because the stones at the top will crush the ones at the bottom. Stone doesn't have a very high, what's called tensile strength. Now, concrete solved that problem, and for that solution, we owe thanks to our friends, the ancient Romans. About 1,000 years BC, give or take a few hundred years, the ancient Romans hit on the recipe for cement. And nobody knows who did it exactly or how they did it, they just did it. And to this day, there are thousands and thousands of structures all over Europe, bridges, buildings, monuments, aqueducts, roadways made out of concrete that the Romans poured. And they are, to this day, better than our modern concrete. That's because somewhere along the line, in about 1100 or so, the recipe for cement that the ancient Romans created was lost. And it stayed lost for another 350 or 400 years, roughly. Like many things happened in the Middle Ages. Now, the Roman way of making concrete cement plus rocks, they used volcanic pumice as their small particles and then pebbles for their larger ones, was different from ours. You've all seen cement coming out of a cement truck, very liquid stuff. I mean, it's heavy, but it's liquid. You can actually pump it even up like liquids. A far-fetched fact that I'm sure you'll fascinate everyone with is that the highest that cement or concrete, pardon me, has ever been pumped up into the air is about 1,300 feet. The largest building on earth, the Burj something or other tower in Dubai, is largely a concrete building, and they pumped it all the way to the top in order to build the top floors. The ancient Romans didn't do that. They didn't have, their concrete was a much thicker, gooier substance. And the way they formed walls and whatnot out of it was that they would simply put down a layer of it, pat it down by hand, and then put down another layer of it, pat it down by hand, and so on. They would throw horsehair in there to make everything stick together. By the way, the Romans didn't exactly, what they were talking about are slaves who were doing that. That's because if any of you have ever poured concrete, you know something about getting it on your hands. It's caustic. It's highly alkaline. It can give you chemical burns if you get it on your hands, and so you don't want to do that. Which brings us to the last important thing I want to say about concrete. We're used to saying that concrete dries. Like, for example, if you have a new driveway poured, say, well, it took 2 days to dry before we could drive on it. Concrete does not dry. In fact, if you've ever watched a driveway or a foundation being built, they will spray water on it and cover it with things in order to keep it wet. That's because water is needed for the 3 different chemical reactions that have to occur to make concrete set up. And they're reactions I don't know anything about, to tell you the truth. I mean, I found the formulas and all that, but they didn't mean that much to me. But what it amounts to is that the water has to stay in there in order to make these chemical reactions work to cause the concrete to harden. If you let it dry too quickly, like on a really hot day, for example, it'll just crumble. It'll be soft. You could tear it apart with your hands, which is why they keep water on it. We owe a lot to concrete. And we're lucky that somebody, a couple of British guys, discovered another formula for concrete or cement in order to make concrete back at roughly the start of the Industrial Revolution, about the late 1850s, early 1860s or thereabouts. Without concrete, it would not be possible to have modern civilization. We would not have buildings more than about 3 stories tall, because that's when bricks would be crushed by the weight of the bricks above them. Even most stone would get crushed by the weight of the stone above them. We would not have modern roadways. We would not have modern pipes, especially sewer pipes, which are largely made out of concrete. We wouldn't have this building because the walls all the way down here and all the way up to the top are made out of concrete. It literally is the stuff that the world is made out of. We take it far too much for granted. That's what it goes next.